Jordan and Gretzky, Serena and Ruth. Remembering great ones is easy to do. But what about the no-names who spent their whole lives long stepping footballs and catching sack flies? They're guys. Remember that guy. 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 They're just gonna remember some guys now.
Richards, he's got Curry on the wing. He's going to spot out. There he goes and rips it. Folks, we got a star in Remember That Guy, the show where we mine our memories from nuggets of nostalgia about peripheral players past and present. Hey there, folks. Meet James, ready to bust your brackets with a guy that's got that underdog in him.
He's got that underdog in him. He is first name Wardell. That's always a fun thing to me. It's always very fun to me that it's just not even close to Stefan as the first name. It is Wardell. I am Diaz. I'm happy to be back with you. And we have a very special guest this week. He is the third man, but number one in the hearts of that Davidson team. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, that's right. It's me, the guy that no one remembers, but went on to become the marketing executive of the NFL who decided who gets to be the sole team in Northern Ireland for anyone to care about and give the Los Angeles Rams all of Asia for no reason.
I was going to be really impressed if we actually named a single player from that Davidson team other than Steph Curry. So I'm proud of us for not being able to do that because that would be some sicko shit. Welcome, folks. It's March Madness, and it is a time when memories like those that Steph Curry did with that Davidson run are made. But I wonder if March Madness is what's making memories for you guys or if it's something else right now.
Well, I'll take that segue to just talk about the couple things I want to talk about, at least, from the opening weekend. There's two coaches who have captured the imaginations of the country over the course of the past week or two. First, I want to talk about Dan Monson. Dan Monson is the outgoing head coach at Long Beach State. And after 15 years, he was informed ahead of the tournament that his services were no longer needed, but he could finish out the season. What does he go and do? He wins the conference tournament in a couple upsets, and they go back to the NCAA tournament for the first time since 2012. What I learned, I Googled to look up more stuff about him. I looked up Don Monson at first and just got the name wrong entirely. But Don Monson is Dan Monson's father. Dan Monson played for Don Monson at Idaho, and Don Monson is the most beloved figure in the history of Idaho basketball. He also played there, but they were a very fledgling program. He never even started for them, but he came back as the head coach, lifted the program out of anonymity and into national prominence, particularly in 1982 when he won the National Coach of the Year award for all of Division I. To run you through who some of his competition was that year, we're talking about Bob Knight. We're talking about Mike Krzyzewski, Dean Smith, Jim Boeheim. We're talking about Jim Valvano. Believe it or not, we are still talking about John Wooden. No, we're not. That's a joke. Okay. That's a joke. I just threw that one in because it's crazy. But all the other guys, they were all active at that time. John Wooden retired 5 years before that. So we're close. There was overlap. Dan Monson's crazy, but Don Monson, learning about him, the most beloved figure in Idaho basketball, very fun to learn about. And when we look at Oakland, Jack Golke obviously has gotten all of the headlines. And for good reason. We all love a scrappy little white boy that does nothing but shoots threes come March. It's one of the favorite recurring characters. I hope that they write him into every season of March Madness. He's always welcome. But a little bit more unique this time was their head coach, Greg Kampe. Guides them to their first win in the round of 64 in the history of the tournament. They had previously won a play-in game, 79-69, very nice, over Alabama A&M. But this is their first time winning it in the tournament proper. In his 41st season as head coach, he took them up from D2. They hired him at the age of 28. And it's funny to think, we started doing this podcast roughly when we were 28. So at the same time that we're starting this endeavor, he's starting to bring Oakland up. And what a reward. It's important to look back on Greg Kampe's legacy as a student athlete himself, because he was a pretty good athlete at Bowling Green State. He started on the basketball team. He also started on the football team, which is what I wanted to just bring up, because We love a good punter on this podcast, and I got to tell you, Mr. Campy set the record for longest punt in the history of Bowling Green State football when he punted it 77 yards his senior year at Bowling Green State.
Bowling Green State's not nothing. They're not a big program, but that stands for something.
It stands for something, and I believe from my research he was second. It's since been overtaken, but it is still the second longest punt in the history of Bowling Green State. So, look, records are meant to be broken. That's what March is all about. And the last thing that March is about that I wanted to talk about is people putting their name on the map. And on the women's side of the bracket, which there's not a ton to talk about, interest on that side, it was fairly chalky, although there were some very serious scares for Iowa, very close scare against West Virginia, very close scare for LSU down at halftime in the second round, and also Stanford getting put to overtime by Iowa State, who is led by the person with the greatest name in all of March Madness, Audie Crooks.
Audie Crooks is pretty good.
Audie Crooks is pretty good. It's a pretty good name. She's a pretty damn good basketball player, too, because in her debut win with Iowa State, she set the freshman NCAA tournament scoring record. I mean, if you haven't seen Audie Crooks, just look her up. She is a fucking behemoth and moves and is strong. I imagine watching her is probably the closest that we've ever had to having, a Shaquille O'Neal in the women's game, where it's just pure
Bowling
physical
ball.
dominance. Yeah. Exactly. But also still has that athleticism to go with it. It's most impressive to see, look, I understand that against Stanford, her numbers were not great. She went 3 of 21. That's just because she wasn't finishing well. She was still getting wherever she wanted. And we're talking about a team that's anchored by Cameron Brink, probably the best defensive player in the country right now. If not Angel Reese, it's definitely Cameron Brink. And she fouled her out. And Cameron Brink couldn't do fucking anything with her. It was incredible to see. But she's going to be a name to look out for going forward. Obviously, Juju Watkins, freshman campaign, USC's on to the Sweet 16. But Audie Crooks, what a name. And we will continue to watch your career with great interest.
I'm glad you brought that up, Diaz, because that was one of the things that I wanted to talk about real quick. Was obviously there's a lot of interest in Caitlin Clark and what Caitlin Clark's doing. It's bringing a lot of eyeballs. But there are so many extremely talented players in the women's game right now. I had a list written out. You already talked about Audie Crooks and Juju Watkins, which Juju averaged 27, 7, and 3 this year as a freshman who does not turn 19 until this summer, which is absolutely insane. We also have Hannah Hidalgo, AP All-American for Notre Dame, 23, 6, and 6. Malaysia Fulwiley for South Carolina. Freshmen do not play a lot of minutes for Dawn Staley's teams because of how stacked they are. She still averaged 12, 3, and 2, mostly off the bench. Madison Booker putting up massive numbers for Texas. There are a lot of really, really talented young players, and the level of the women's game is continuing to grow and is so good. And I just implore anyone who's maybe watching the women's game for the first time because of Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, please keep watching after this year. There are so many talented players.
Just because you touched more on Juju Watkins, I just want to shout out a player that won't be back next year, but a legend in her own right, Kayla Padilla, who was a transfer from Penn. And from her freshman year at Penn, it was very clear from the first time I watched her play, I was like, oh, she is significantly better than everybody that's on this floor right now. She's hit some real big shots for USC this season, so shout out her. If Juju Watkins does the miraculous run, it will be with the help of Kayla Padilla at some point along the line. I'll just throw that out there.
So good. It's so fun to watch, and like I said, people just keep watching after this year. So many good talents. The only other thing I want to talk about was USA once again beating Mexico in a final. 2-0. 7.
I'm learning things.
USA has not lost to Mexico in the 2020s. They have not conceded a goal in a competitive game in 6 games. This rivalry is extremely one-sided right now, and I will never not enjoy that because it was 70 years of being the other way around.
Well, and it's come so far that, James, even you, a relative soccer non-watcher, I think it's fair to say, you know about Dos Acero. It's become
I know Dos Acero.
But it's become so routine that Christian Pulisic didn't even realize it. When a reporter asked him after the game, like, how does it feel, Dos Acero against Mexico again? He's like, yeah, I guess it was Dos Acero. All right, yeah, that's pretty cool.
Is the 11th time that it was Dos Acero in the USA-Mexico game, which is the most common scoreline, is just so fitting. But enough about that. James, what is making memories for you?
So, since last we spoke, the city of Baltimore has lost some pillars of its community. The most recent of those pillars were the support columns for the Key Bridge this morning, and that's a wild thing. And listening to the local news this morning when they were like, your commute is now 95 or 895, 695 is gone. Something about the phrase 695 is gone was nuts.
I am now become death, destroyer of bridges.
Yes. But the ship Dali and the surrealist masterpiece that is that destroyed bridge is one thing. The other pillar of the community that was lost is Peter Angelos. Peter Angelos did pass away recently, and I'm not going to say anything about this very complicated man that has not already been said, I'm sure, by the time this comes up. But I feel, given that I have been very rude towards the Angelos families at time recently, that it was maybe okay to say some of the things about the fact that he was Peter Angelos. He was a pretty good guy altogether. Got his money by being like, he's painted as an ambulance chaser. But what he was really doing most of the time was working with trade unions for like asbestos-related lawsuits. Makes enough money to buy the local boyhood team that he had, much like our soon-to-be new owner. And Peter Angelos initially was spending a lot. We had a really high payroll for many years, relatively. Also, owner that was maybe the only pro-labor owner in the history of the sport. I don't know anyone else that can claim that, but he did vote in favor of the players' union both times that there were votes for that in 94 and 95. And then he started like fiddling with it, and frankly, Angelos just didn't know ball. That's really what it was. Peter Angelos just did not know ball and wanted to know ball and wanted to spend a lot of money on ball. Didn't know how to do it well, so the team plunged into abject terribleness, and then by the time they were good again, he was more or less incapacitated. Really, it's his sons that are the dipshits, and that's where all the animosity towards the Angelos family comes from. Peter Angelos, largely an okay dude. I do want to share what happened when I learned of it, because I broke pretty late, but I was on West Coast time, had a friend's bachelor party in Las Vegas. And this was during a 24-hour period where I consumed more alcohol than I ever have in a 24-hour period in my life. It is very safe to say. And we're all fully fine walking around at this point, going through a cavernous area with escalators. When this news breaks, I pull out my phone. I say quite loudly, it echoes, "Oh shit, Peter Angelos just died." And some of the groups from Baltimore, some wasn't. Or some are asking, what's up with that? We go through it. They're like, was he? I was like, oh no, he was 94, so it's not like a tragic death. Again, reverberating through the room. So that's what I said out loud in that moment. Just thought that might pull us out of this sadness over lost pillars of the community.
I think it was Spike Eskin that once said, 82 is a perfectly fine age to die.
I do also
even more perfectly fine.
I want to talk about one last guy real quick. In Japan, there is what I have understood and what I've tried to look up for, and if anyone knows better about this, please feel free to correct me, but there is a tournament similar to the FA Cup in that it is not restricted by what class you are. Sumo is very rigid in its classes, not with teams, but with individual sumo wrestlers. So you're largely competing within your division and stuff. If you ever wanted to see a cool quick download on sumo, the one segment of Freakonomics that's about it and about the sumo match throwing is very good. There's been a lot of scandal in sumo the last couple decades, but they've got a really bright story right now because a very young 24-year-old sumo wrestler, I'm going to try and get this right, Takuro Fuji is his ring name. His real name is Mikiya Ishioka, and he just recently debuted back in 2022. That makes him the, first off, fastest competitor since they adopted like the current tournament schedule that they have as sumo, to win their first Emperor's Cup under 2 years. He is still the lowest rank of the 42 wrestlers that were in this division. He's had a pretty bright start, as one might imagine from someone that reached this. But like there were grand champion guys in this particular match, and he was far, far, far below them. But the bracket worked out well, a little bit of March Madness perhaps. And as I said, he did win. And by doing so, Takarafuji became the first like rookie designated sumo to capture the Emperor's Cup. How many years? How many years do we think? Let's hear from the two of you.
42.
42. Diaz?
69.
The last time this was accomplished was in 1914, 110 years ago.
All right, just put them together and we were right on the money.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. There we go. It was a team effort. Yeah, it's just a really cool story that I learned. I've had a passing interest in sumo since I watched that one documentary portion of Freakonomics, which again I do recommend. It is unfortunate that has then foisted Malcolm Gladwell upon the world, but like Freakonomics was cool.
One very wandering and American thought on sumo wrestling. I would love to see what Aaron Donald could do over there.
Ooh, I like that. Now
that he's retired, I'm not saying send him straight to the top, but let's throw him in against like your average sumo wrestler at the local gym. I want to give him a month, give him 3 months to learn, and let's see what happens.
I really like that, and I think we need to get in touch with his people. Takarafuji, all of these guys we've talked about, they are in the process of building, I think, some pretty cool stories. But it is time for us to turn to our main stories of the day. And for the first time in, let me check real quick, over 3 months, I'm the one that will be selecting the category for that this week. So I looked at what we had this past season and tried to kind of fit it in this. Between Cinderella guys, like one-time all-stars, it felt like even more than usual with some of these categories, we really went for some deep archetypes that have come up again and again, and we tried to lock onto those archetypes that have been a part of this overall discussion of Guy and really look at them closely. And so what I wanted to do today, do the exact same thing with the number one archetype I think we haven't necessarily just laid out as itself, and that's that of the journeyman. The term journeyman is going to originally be referring to like medieval trade guilds. This was after you had finished your apprenticeship. There was a French word, journée, that described the fact that you would then, you're not just immediately a master, you're going to go ply your trade out in the countryside. You are going to basically go on a journey and do your trade long enough to be considered a master craftsman, having finished this apprenticeship. And what that has come to mean in sports, as we've moved here into the 20th and 21st centuries, is someone who makes a lot of stops, is largely competent, but is never, a master of their craft, never really settles down in one place, never like really firmly connects with one location. They have to have a lot of stops, and they have to make those stops relatively, I think, short. And I think this term has largely become most associated with the position of quarterback. Some recent legends that have retired, like Ryan Fitzpatrick, Josh McCown, all-time journeyman quarterbacks. Nowadays, I look at the current crop, I think I would pick my number one journeyman quarterback that's playing right now, 2022 Guy of the Year, Gardner Minshew. I'm going to go ahead and say he's on his fifth team now. I think we've got some really good credentials building there.
Yes, Minshew for sure. And I don't want to let it go by without saying paying $150 an hour before kickoff and then seeing Josh McCown play the entire playoff game against the Seahawks is genuinely a top 3 experience of going to an Eagles game for me. Seeing this old fuck who has nothing left and has literally already sheared his hamstring off of the bone, still giving it all he had out there. It was beautiful. I do love Josh McCown. I wish him nothing but success in the future.
It is a position that I think engenders a lot of affection because, like, obviously this is incorrect, but we feel more connected to these guys. Their accomplishments feel more grounded, more achievable by the common fan. Again, that is absurd. We should not think those things. But when we compare them to the superstars of the sport, I think it's a natural one. So those are some great ones. But I want to go a little bit further back to one of the true earliest and best journeymen of the Super Bowl era, a guy by the name of Earl Morrall.
Ooh, good old Earl Morrall.
Earl Morrall, one of the, I think, early great NFL backup quarterbacks. But let's back up a little further than that. He's born in May of 1934, May 17th to be specific, in Muskegon, Michigan. After an illustrious high school career there in Muskegon, Michigan, he goes to nearby East Lansing to Michigan State for coaches Biggie Mon and Duffy Doherty. Just an excellent pair of coach names that he served under there in MSU.
Can you say that first one again?
Biggie Mon.
So he's just the Digimon.
You know what? I like that. That is indeed what that coach was. The Spartans are pretty good under these two, and they are pretty good with Morrall under center there. As a senior, he leads a 9-win campaign. That last win is in 1956. It's in the Rose Bowl against UCLA. Caps, we'll call this his apprenticeship here in the college ranks. And now that he has shown the competency, he's going to go out on his journey. He's going to ply his trade. He's going to see if he can become a master craftsman at the QB. And the Rose Bowl seems to have been excellent PR for him because he is then taken second overall in the 1956 draft by the San Francisco 49ers. The thing about craftsmen is that it's about specialization. To this point, Morrall has been playing football and baseball, even manning the left side of the Spartan infield in the College World Series. He's going to leave that baseball behind and focus exclusively on this master status. And after a few sporadic appearances in the first 4 games for the 49ers, he finally gets a chance to start 4 games down the stretch, and he goes 1-3 with a 48.1 rating. Not particularly good. Nothing to write home about. And I would say that is maybe because he is still not necessarily specializing. During this year, San Francisco is also having him serve as his punter. He's got a totally respectable 1,705 punting yards on 45 altogether for a 37.9 average. That is going to be like half of his punting total for a very, very long career. He is really not going to do that much more after this first year. Again, he needs to specialize a little bit. But he is not going to get a chance to do that here in San Francisco. He has to begin that other element of a journeyman career, which is the journey itself. San Francisco makes a trade in September of 1957. They send him all the way across the country to the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Tragic.
It's pretty tragic because also not only do we hate the Steelers, they suck ass still at this point. By this point in 1957, they have made the playoffs a single time in their history, losing to none other than the Philadelphia Eagles when they made that one appearance in 1947. It's been 10 years since that single playoff appearance when he gets here. Earl Morrall does, though, get a chance to start for the whole season. He's going to start all 12 games of this 1957 season, which, just because we've mentioned uniform numbers this season, I do want to point out, the first time that they have the helmet numbers on the Steelers uniform. So Earl Morrall is the first Steelers quarterback to have his number on his helmet. They go 6-6. It's a pretty mediocre team. And the next year does not start much better. And so despite making a pretty sizable investment in Earl Morrall, sending over a couple first round picks for him and another player, they cut bait halfway into the second season. We unfortunately cannot stay here in the Steeler mediocrity for long because we have to go to a much better team. Pittsburgh is trading for a Hall of Fame quarterback, former MVP Bobby Lane, from a much better team. The class of the league, 3 titles in the past decade at this point. They are the reigning champion Detroit Lions.
The last time that it was good to be a citizen of Detroit.
You've got the Tigers 27 years after that. That's it, though. Those two, nothing between those 2 times.
The Red Wings, how good were the Red Wings in the late 90s, early 2000s?
Well, that's what we're saying. Nothing between these 2 times.
All
57,
right.
84, just bleak. Well, and not terrible bleak, I should say. The Lions are retooling. They've had these very good 50s. Bobby Lane was under center. Decided, okay, Bobby Lane's done enough. We're going to bring this guy in, Earl Morrall. He's never going to be the starter for Detroit, really, unless push comes to shove. He is still in this quarterback room at all times. There's a carousel of starters going through that he's always kind of standing behind. Because what they're doing now as they shift out of the 50s into the 60s is Detroit's just saying, okay, we're just going all defense right now. Nothing else. And they're not terrible during this time. They're 29, 21, and 2 through 1962. Cool. It's not getting them into the playoffs at all. Even with their 11-3 campaign that last season, they're just not making it in. Having just a defense stop people is not going to do it if your quarterbacks are Tobin Rote, Jim Nanowski, and Milt Plum. Had never heard of any of those three before I got into this. And I could tell you that one of them was fake, and I'd be lying, but I don't think you'd be surprised if I said that.
The only other person I know, Tobin, was the FDU coach last year, who's now the Iona coach. Like that, those are the only two Tobins I know.
Tobin Heath is the one.
Fair.
Yeah.
Tobin Heath, fair.
1963. Earl Morrall is finally going to get a chance at that starter's job because Milt Plum is simply not cutting it. And he's sixth in the league in passing yards after taking over like 2 games in. So he got 2,621. Totally respectable total at this time. The Lions, though, take a big 5.5 game leap back. Pretty crummy under him, not really going anywhere. Largely that's the defense taking a step back, but the quarterback is going to get a lot of attention, even if they're doing okay. Because of that and because of an injury the next year, he is going to get replaced by Plum once again. And at this point, he's been in Detroit for 7 years. We're getting like dangerously close to kind of falling into a beloved longtime backup in a city, which is a perfectly fine kind of guy, but that's not a journeyman guy. However, we do finally get this journey to resume when he is once again traded, this time to the New York Football Giants, because they are in the middle of a rebuild and they need the equivalent of a football innings eater. And I don't know if there is a good term for that, but they need football Jordan Lyles to just come out and fucking take some hits, dude. We're just getting through these next 2 seasons.
I mean, that would be like a who would be like the modern? Jay Cutler is a recent one I can think of. Jay Cutler is a big innings eater vibe. Kurt Warner, when he first got traded to the Giants ahead of Eli, that was kind of the MO
Okay.
There.
I mean, you could even say Kirk Cousins, if we're using innings eater in like a positive sense, like someone you know is going to give you a consistent amount of volume. And he does that. He does that for the New York Football Giants. It doesn't matter because the Giants are not trying to win. They go 7-7 the first year. He goes 1-5-1 as a starter the following year. And so they kind of use this as an excuse to shift his role around. And then they acquire Fran Tarkenton in a trade. And so now that there is no place for him once again, he's going to get traded for the 4th time now. Because after going from San Francisco to Pittsburgh to New York, and now to the Baltimore Colts.
Boo! Wait, do we boo the Baltimore Colts? We just boo the Indianapolis.
We don't boo the Baltimore
team.
Colts. We don't boo the Baltimore Colts. And Xavier, I don't think you want to boo this next season that we're getting to. So just hang tight for a moment. We love the Baltimore Colts. The Baltimore Colts are excellent. The Indianapolis professional football team can eat shit, but the Baltimore Colts are great. I'm going to build up, though, to a hot take here. I'm going to try this, Diaz. I want you to grade this hot take when we get to it, but I developed one while reading through this.
I'm all ears.
So, if you know about the Baltimore Colts, there is a single player that stands on a pedestal, and that is Johnny Unitas. Just this last season when we get here, in 1967, won his 3rd MVP award. Very impressive. Colts, though, also have a very excellent coach, Don Shula. Great offensive mind. Has managed a very good team at this point. He's the all-time winningest coach, and I'm actually going to take 1 second and say, I love that Bill Belichick might not actually beat Don Shula's record. He might not be able to get another job to get the 2 or 3 seasons that he needs to squeeze it out. And God, that would be fucking sweet because I know that he wants it desperately. Don Shula's very good. Create a good system that Johnny Unitas has been functioning in. Johnny Unitas in the last preseason game here in 1968 gets his elbow just fucking wrecked by the Dallas Cowboys. And so traded for Earl Morrall, and Earl Morrall's going to step at this point, like, he has only started 64 games in the 12 years that he has been a quarterback to date. He is a career clipboard holder. He was traded like a white elephant. He steps into this team with, like, immense expectations. The Colts are title contenders, and he is fucking nails. The Colts improve from 11-2-1 the year before to 13-1. And Earl Morrall leads the league in touchdowns with almost 3,000 yards. Your boy is a Pro Bowler, but not just that. He is also All-Pro. And not just that, he is league MVP operating out of the Don Shula system, which brings me to the question, is Johnny Unitas also a system QB? There we go, Diaz. Talk to me.
I really like it. I really, really like it because it's what you could have said in like 2009 about Tom Brady.
Okay, I appreciate that evaluation. I think that makes me feel good about that take. These Colts, unfortunately, do have the distinction of being the very first NFL champions to not be Super Bowl champions because they do get to the Jets. And Earl Morrall, frankly, plays pretty fucking badly in the game. Like, Earl Morrall is a big reason the Colts lose this game. Johnny Unitas actually comes in relief of him late in the game. Doesn't make a difference. Jets win. Xavier has flipped me off a lot there. That's fine. I'm happy for him. Again,
I wasn't
Baltimore
flipping
has
you
won
off.
other
Don't
things
worry.
since then.
I wasn't flipping you off.
I mean, you
flipping
were
off the
raising middle
concept.
fingers that were...
I was flipping off the concept of that team because fuck them.
He was flipping off the concept of that team. You walked in at the worst time.
Well, regardless of Xavier's take on this, and regardless of the overall outcome, this is an incredible moment for this guy on his 5th team. He's 34 years old. Like, this is great. But Johnny Unitas is Johnny Unitas. Johnny Unitas takes the starting job back the next year because, like, come on, we're not going to make this a controversy. And Johnny Unitas continues to function well in that system. Earl Morrall is his backup still in the next couple of years. He gets some reps in the season. And eventually, after the first ever AFC Championship game, they make it back to the biggest of games. They face the team that injured Johnny Unitas, Dallas, Super Bowl V. And this game has apparently many names. I have learned this, many nicknames. They are all variations of like the blunder or the blooper or the Stupor Bowl because it's just ugly as shit game. There's a bunch of errors, there's missed point afters. It's just crappy. Part of this may be because it is the first one played on AstroTurf. I think that's notable.
That's the Super Bowl where Chuck Howley became the only person to win MVP on a losing team, right?
Yes, this is indeed the one where like it is so bad that basically the linebacker Chuck Howley for Dallas is going to end up being the winner. But he's the winner of the Super Bowl MVP. That is not necessarily where we care about. Johnny Unitas is not looking great. Then, trailing 13-6 in the second quarter, he is drilled by Dallas a second time that the Cowboys knock him out of the game with an injury, opening up an opportunity for Earl Morrall. Comes in and goes 7-15 the rest of the way for 147 yards and 1 pick. It's not great, but the defense pitches a shutout the rest of the way, and the offense is able to score twice, one of those being a game-winning field goal with a second left afterwards. Dallas is not able to do anything with the kickoff, and Baltimore Colts win Super Bowl V. Earl Morrall is the quarterback on the field for the last play in which the Colts score that field goal that does give them their first Super Bowl ring for the city of Baltimore. It's a big thing. He is not the game MVP, as we mentioned. It's Chuck Howley, but that's okay. Got his ring.
I'm imagining the absurdity in a modern context, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Super Bowl MVP is the person that says, like, where do you go next? Oh, I'm going to Disneyland.
Oh, yeah.
Like, imagine they actually track down Chuck Howley. Be like, Chuck Howley, you just won Super Bowl MVP. What are you doing next? Like, I'm getting a fucking beer. Like, I'm pissed, man. Like, get out of my face. It would be Earl Morrall is who they would have to say the line.
The next year, this injury still is affecting Unitas. So Earl gets a decent amount of play time. And the Colts team go 10-4. They just missed the playoffs. This ends his time in Baltimore because, again, we can't find a home yet. We can't stay anywhere for too long. We still got to continue this journeyman career of Earl's. And so in 1972, he's on waivers. Don Shula, who has found himself with another Hall of Fame quarterback, this time Bob Grease. I'm going to posit to you another question in a moment. It's week 5. Grease suffers a broken leg and a dislocated ankle. And thankfully for Don Shula, just recently on the waiver wire, acquired an old friend of his, Earl Morrall. And so Earl Morrall steps in, wins that game. And then he wins the next 9 games to help the 1972 Miami Dolphins complete their unbeaten regular season. Folks, I ask you, is Bob Grease a system quarterback?
See, the true answer here is that every single quarterback is a system quarterback.
Exactly.
And no individuals are actually good on their own.
Precisely. Thank you. This is what I've been trying to get to.
I do want to say I do think it's Bob Greasy, but
Bob Greasy? My apologies.
Yeah,
but
no, his son is Brian Greasy.
But they're both system quarterbacks, so fuck it, it's Grease now.
It's Grease, it's Greasy. It's a system that both he, Hall of Famer, and Earl Morrall, very much not a Hall of Famer, can function well in. And like I said, gets the unbeaten Dolphins into the playoffs. They remain unbeaten in the playoffs. Earl makes a Pro Bowl once again, but he does not play in it because he leads them to his 2 postseason wins. He does not finish the AFC Championship game, but they do get a 16-0 record as they head into the Super Bowl. Greasy is inserted here in the Super Bowl. Morrall does not get any play time, but you know what he does get? Another ring, because this is the 17-0 1972, still only unbeaten team in Super Bowl history, Miami Dolphins. And as evidenced by that Super Bowl start, like just as it was with the Colts, the hierarchy here is known. While Earl did a phenomenal job, he is not the starter. So he returns to that backup capacity once again. Wins another ring. Dolphins get another Super Bowl. But Earl just starts 3 more games over the final 4 years there, the backup the entire time. And it ends up, because of a couple starts, eventually at 41, becoming the oldest starter in league history, which he does hold for quite some time. Does not start at all in his age 42 season. Does then retire as 21-year vet of the NFL. He sticks around in Florida, sticks around in the Miami area, and becomes University of Miami's quarterback coach, and works with, as he did as a backup for many, many years in the league, a bunch of really good quarterbacks here in college. He's got Jim Kelly. He's got Bernie Kosar. He's got Vinny Testaverde. All of them coming up under him as Hurricanes. He does dip his toes a little bit into local politics, which is great. We love that. He does it as a Republican, and we don't love that, so we'll just move on from there in his brief time as a city councilman and mayor. He eventually passes away at the age of 79 in 2014, and when he does, he is one of the 345 brains that are examined for CTE, and he has grade 4 CTE, which is like the very, very worst. His brain was wrecked, and while that is tragic, I think that puts a really good bow on the Earl Morrall story in a lot of ways, because I think that speaks to, it seems in so many ways very easy to be a journeyman backup quarterback. You sit and you hold the clipboard and stuff, but sometimes you have to be ready to then step in and take licks against teams that are salivating at the thought of getting the backup signal caller. It is not easy to be a journeyman. You still had to go through an apprenticeship. Even if you never reach the master status, you have this craft that you apply for as long as you can. And he did it about as long as anyone could. Again, 21 years, 102 starts in that time. A respectable number, triple digits, just over 20,000 career passing yards. He remained ready and he put his body on the line, but like in none of these stops did he become a household name. However, this is the last thing I'll leave you with. While his name cannot be found in any households, it can be found in one place. Because in 2018, PFRA, the Pro Football Researchers Association, named Earl to the 2018 class for the Hall of Very Good, which is not anything that I will say I knew officially existed when we started this show, and does make me worried to ever mention them in case they send us any kind of cease and desist stuff. But if he is eligible for the Hall of Very Good, sure does feel like he should be eligible for the Hall of Guy. And so that is the guy that I present to you today, my journeyman, Earl Morrall.
No, I love learning more about the story because as a sports nerd, I grew up checking out a lot of the books at the school library about like, oh, what are the crazy old baseball games that happened? What are the crazy old football games that happened? And Earl Morrall was a name that came up when talking about those Colts and the Broadway Joe guarantee. But always good to learn more about a character that we've briefly touched on before.
Xavier, any final gloating you want to get in?
No, I got nothing else to add on Earl Morrall.
Xavier, if you don't have anything to add, let's then turn to Diaz, see what he has to add in terms of nominees that we have this week.
Well, hopefully I can assist with that, James, because I want to talk about basketball and I want to talk about a guy that racked up a whole bunch of assists in his career. You talked in your intro about the archetype of the journeyman, and I think within basketball, the archetype of the floor general is one that's kind of going away. These days, you want your point guard or your primary ball handler, ideally to be your primary scorer as well. This runs against what was like a long history in basketball of just your classic set up the offense, get the ball to the scorers in the spots, point guard. I think the last one that I can think of that's playing right now is probably Chris Paul, but obviously he's an all-time great. Obviously we can't talk about him. Another guy that I could talk about would be Ish Smith.
the most journeyman basketball player of all time.
Exactly. Played for 13 different franchises. He is a Sixers legend among them, but he was just waived last month, but has not officially retired yet. So while I know we have loosened that standard a little bit, I want to at least respect it. If Ish still got Ish to prove, I'm going to let him do it. But the guy I do want to talk about, he is definitely retired, although he's still floating around on the periphery of the basketball scene. He made stops with 9 different franchises throughout his NBA career. Among them, he is a Philadelphia 76ers legend. James, I'm glad to tell you, he is a San Antonio Spurs legend.
Vamos los Spurs.
Unfortunately, not a Knicks legend, Xavier. Could only go 2 out of 3 there.
That's all right.
As true a point guard as has ever played in the league. And even though he once led the league in assists per game, never once made an all-star game. I want to atone, I guess I should say, to Xavier. I want to give you something a little more in the vein of what you were probably hoping for from basketball last week. I want to talk about the man who is currently the head coach of the Grand Rapids Gold of the NBA G League, Andre Miller.
Okay, so we're going to talk about old man basketball today. The man that Khalif Wyatt was compared to how many times during that 2012-2013 season?
It's funny because like their movements were exactly the same, but their approaches to the game could not have been more opposite. Like Khalif was like, I am going to slowly create enough space for me to get this jumper off. And Andre Miller was, I'm going to slowly dribble 3 feet this way to create the angle for this entry pass to get this assist. Same, but different, but still same. Andre Miller was born March 19th, 1976. So we want to wish a happy belated 48th birthday to Andre Miller. He was born in Los Angeles, California, and more specifically, he grew up in Compton, which, if you know much about anything of Los Angeles, Compton is a pretty rough area to have to grow up. But he grew up with a mother who was a very strong influence, worked very hard to be able to put him into a private school. And so he attended private schools all throughout his upbringing, and by the time he got to high school, he enrolled at Verbum Dei, which is Word of God, as opposed to Mater Dei, which is something else of God. I don't know what Mater
Mother
is
of
exactly.
God.
Mother of God. There you go. So we got Verbum Dei, and he's not a natural basketball player when he arrives there. Part of that is because of his family situation. By the time that he was old enough to work, his mom basically said, all right, I'm not paying for your private school tuition. Like, you're going to have to start doing stuff around the house. You're going to have to do things to earn money. So he was always doing landscaping, and he would be late for practice his freshman year because of that. His coach was one of those classic hard-ass coaches, but he said, like, look, the kid's showing up with grass stains on his shorts. How am I going to punish him for being late? By the time he gets to his sophomore year, he's been working hard. He does make the varsity, but local newspapers are not impressed, and this is probably word for word what somebody wrote about Khalif Wyatt, Xavier. He was described in the local papers as, and I quote, chubby, slow-footed, and undersized at guard.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Almost exactly how you would have described Khalif Wyatt. But Andre Miller, again, a very different type of player, the more classic point guard, and by the time he is an upperclassman, he's rounding into form. He's becoming a coveted recruit, and he wins the Wooden Award for the best high school player in all of South California. Not to mention, he was also the starting quarterback on the football team by this point, which I feel like any great athlete that becomes a basketball player, it always also turns out like, oh, and he was the quarterback for his high school team. Like Paolo Banchero, I'm pretty sure was. Also, so he's excelling in the basketball court. He's excelling on the football field. He's also excelling in the classroom where he's an honor student. His academics are of no concern. He has interest from all of these programs, and then he has to take the ACT. What we now know about standardized tests like the SAT and the ACT, and the reason why they're being phased out is because there's certain cultural biases inherent within them. And if you're listening to this and you've never heard about this, to give just like a very broad example, let's say a question references rowing. Somebody from a more affluent white neighborhood might know that we're talking about boats and paddling, and somebody from an impoverished black neighborhood might not have any idea. Like they're going to think like rows and columns when they see that. That's just like one example of the kind of things that can pop up. And Andre struggles with the ACT because of that as well. Based on his scores, there's almost nowhere that's willing to give him a scholarship because What the NCAA recently instituted at this time was Prop 48, which basically says you need to have a certain combination of GPA and standardized test score to be able to play on a team as a freshman. And if you don't, then your first year is a redshirt year. Prove that you can handle college classes. If you can, then you can play on the team the next year. So that scares off a whole bunch of programs. But there's an assistant coach at Utah by the name of Donnie Daniels. Donnie also grew up in LA, also went to Verbum Day. He basically goes to Rick Majerus, the head coach at Utah at this point, and gives his pitch. Says, look, I understand. I'm telling you, this kid has a good head on his shoulders. He's going to be worth it. Let's just eat the scholarship for a year. I promise you he's going to be worth it. Rick is convinced, and so Andre Miller goes to Utah on a full scholarship, but cannot play for one full year. Redshirts that first season, obviously, and then comes back as a redshirt freshman and slides right into the starting lineup. His freshman year, he averages 8.6 points and 4.6 assists for a team that goes to the Sweet 16. They beat Canisius and Iowa State, but then they bow out to Kentucky. His sophomore year, he's forming a great tandem with the senior Keith Van Horn. He steps his averages up to 9.8 points, 6.1 assists, and they're looking to make a deep run. First round, Navy, no problem. Second round, Charlotte, no problem. Sweet 16, Stanford, no problem. They make it to the Elite Eight, and they bow out to Kentucky. His junior season, Keith Van Horn's graduated. Expectations are pretty low for this Utah team. They're going to need to reshape and redefine themselves in some way to be able to still perform. And for Andre Miller, he knows that this means he's going to have to shoulder more of the scoring load. A lot of points per game just left the building when Keith Van Horn graduated. So he takes a very large leap up. His assists fall off a little bit. He goes from 6.1 assists to 5.2, having to be more offensive minded. But his points per game go from 9.8 to 14.2. So almost a 5-point per game increase. And he also does it on a collegiate best 55% from the field, which for a 6-foot guard to shoot 55% from the field, and he also wasn't really shooting threes, incredibly impressive. But to Xavier's point, what he has, it's not necessarily that he's hitting these mid-range jumpers. Andre Miller at 6 feet probably has the best post game I've ever seen of any basketball player ever. Like, of all time, Hakeem Olajuwon might be the only one that I would say has better post work. On just a fundamental level of moving your feet and leveraging your size to create space to get your little hook shots off and shit, it is a joy to watch Andre Miller do this. Not to mention also doing it on the defensive end, 2.1 steals per game. Utah rolls through the regular season and they end up getting a 3 seed going into the tournament. Their first weekend, San Francisco, Arkansas, no problem. Sweet 16, West Virginia, no problem. Now we get to the Elite Eight, and Utah as the 3 seed is taking on the 1 seed Arizona Wildcats. Arizona, still led by Lute Olson at this time. As great of a program as they've been, this is probably the best stretch that they ever had. And you look at some of the talent they had holding down their guard spots. They have Mike Bibby and Jason Terry. They're a 1 seed for a reason. They are the title favorite. Andre Miller doesn't give a fuck. He's going to give you 18 points. He's going to give you 14 rebounds. He's going to give you 13 assists for just the 4th triple-double in the history of the NCAA tournament. And the Utes rout Arizona 76-51 on their way to the Final Four.
Go Utes. I love saying the Utes. It's a very fun one to say during any of their runs.
Utes is a good one. It's gives the same energy as like Dartmouth Big Green. It's not the same off the tongue, but it's that same kind of energy. It's just like, or the Philadelphia Phillies, honestly.
I mean, same with Illinois Illini.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. But the Utes are through to the Final Four. They face UNC in the semifinal. No problem. Roll right through them. And they go into the national championship game where they lose 78-69 to Kentucky.
The sad thing is that I knew how that was going to go because I remembered Xavier saying that Wat Masaka had the only championship in Utah history.
He does. But did you know that it was for the 3rd year in a row that the Utes were eliminated by the Kentucky Wildcats.
That is Jesus, man. I would be so pissed off.
I mean, at this point, going into senior year, the formula is clear. If we can just avoid the fucking Wildcats, we can win it all. Unfortunately, championship, obviously, you got to meet them at some point if you're going to. But senior year, just avoid Kentucky. You're going to be golden. Andre Miller steps it up again. His points per game go to 15.8. He has 5.6 assists a game, 2.5 steals a game. He powers Utah to a 2 seed. They're looking even stronger than last year. They win their opening round game easily. There's no Kentucky in sight, but there is Miami, Ohio, and it is the Miami of Ohio that shocks the 2 seed Utes and upsets them in round 2 to bring a very anticlimactic ending to Andre Miller's collegiate career.
The Kentucky of Ohio and also the Miami of Ohio at the same time.
Right. There should be a Kentucky of Ohio school. If there's not, there should be.
I think it's technically Bowling Green because there's 2 Bowling Greens, one of them in Kentucky and one of them in Ohio. So just make Bowling Green the Kentucky of Ohio.
Back to Greg Campy again. This is incredible how circular our March Madness discussions have ended up being. But just to focus on the senior season for Andre Miller, he is a consensus first-team All-American. He does leave Utah as the program's all-time leader in steals. Still holds that record. And second all-time in assists behind only Jeff Jonas. He is still second on that list. By the way, in 1999, he graduated after 4 years with a degree in sociology, becoming the first and, as far as I can tell, still only Prop 48 student athlete to graduate in 4 years.
That's a fun distinction. I feel like we don't get a lot of good academic distinctions for some of these guys.
Right. Well, and especially because, I mean, if you think in the context of Prop 48, usually the only reason why you would bring a player who has such poor academics is because they're so good that they're probably only going to be there like a year or two. So, yeah, Andre Miller, incredible. And to ask him, it still all goes back to his mother. His college roommate was Michael Doliak, also on the basketball team. And he always remembered it would be a literal, like, nightly occurrence. He'd call, check in with his mom, tell her that he did all his homework. And it wasn't a thing where it was like he was afraid of her. He just so desperately wanted her to be proud of him and like wanted her approval. It wasn't a fear. It was seeking that approval. And I mean, who wouldn't be impressed? Consensus All-American, graduating with your degree in 4 years. Very impressive. But before he can put that sociology degree to use, obviously, he is at this point a fairly coveted prospect coming out of college and into the NBA draft. There's basically 3 point guards at the top, and the debate going into the draft is how do you rank these 3 point guards? We got Baron Davis, we got Steve Francis, we got Andre Miller. Baron Davis a little more scoring, Steve Francis is kind of a combo of the two, whereas Andre's being the more classic distributor. Everybody's got their preference. It is Stevie Franchise who goes off the board first, goes number 2 to the Grizzlies, who then trade him to the Rockets. Baron Davis goes 3 to the Hornets, and Andre Miller falls all the way down to 8 to the Cleveland Cavaliers. Rookie season, immediate starter, does pretty well, 11 points, 6 assists a game, finishes 4th in Rookie of the Year voting behind Elton Brand, Stevie Franchise, and I accidentally deleted the third person. It was Elton Brand that won it. All that matters is the winner. And unfortunately, he's not even the third place champion because the third place champion is the person who I forgot to.
Well, now he is. He just became the third place champion.
He did. He did. In the canon of this podcast, he certainly is. Second season, obviously, the kind of classic thing is you expect that sophomore slump, but that's more true for kind of one and done players. Andre Miller arrived a refined prospect. He's only going to get more up to speed with the NBA. He's going to give you 15.8 points a game and 8 assists even, but no accolades to speak of for this season. And if you're wondering how the Cavaliers did, they're the Cavaliers.
Yeah.
So we don't have any playoffs to worry about.
I didn't hear the one teammate that I figured would make a difference in that.
Right. Yeah. Not quite yet. His third season.
I looked it up. Hold on. That was a year where Elton Brand and Steve Francis tied for Rookie of the Year.
Oh my God. That's right. Yeah. That's why I didn't write the other person.
And second place was Lamar Odom, which means Andre Miller was the third place champion because first place was 2 people.
I say that's bullshit. You can't get second place behind two people. I'm sorry, two people finished ahead of you. That's Lamar Odom finished third. With all due respect, everyone I think that's bullshit.
Sorry, Diaz, I tried, but James is getting all technical out here.
No, but we erased Lamar Odom, and so now he stepped in. We
don't. We can't erase Lamar Odom.
He got Thanos snapped.
We will talk a little more about Lamar Odom in a little bit. There's a little tease for you. But for this third season, I mean, this is a travesty of justice by the NBA. I thought that the biggest travesty was Andre Iguodala not winning the 2006 slam dunk contest to Nate Robinson. But Andre Miller this year, let me tell you the stats first. Starts all 81 games in which he appears. He averages 16.5 points to go with a league-leading 10.9 assists per game. He's the only player in the league to average 10 points and 10 assists a game. He's also chipping in 1.6 steals per game. And God damn it, would you believe that was not enough to make the All-Star game?
Who we gotta ban real quick.
So that's the thing, because it's very easy and everybody always gripes like, oh, this person should have made it, that person should have made it. But nobody wants to say who should have been left off. There's 3 candidates that I can give you that should have been left off. We got, first of all, his draft mate, Baron Davis. Baron Davis averages 18.1 points per game as compared to his 16.5 and 8 assists a game. Now, granted, stylistically, Baron Davis is probably the person you'd rather see in that game. Okay. Jermaine O'Neal gives you 19 points a game and 10.5 rebounds a game that year. Pretty solid for a big, but is it quite, to me, 2010 is the threshold for a big to be surefire all-star. So I think he's just under that threshold. And then the biggest gripe that I would have is probably Alonzo Mourning. Alonzo Mourning's great. I love Alonzo Mourning. All-time NBA. This is very much like our Jim Edmonds discussion last year. I'm only talking about this year of Alonzo Mourning. 15.7 points and 8.4 boards. Granted, 2.5 blocks, sure. But Andre Miller had 1.6 steals, and that's basically the blocks of little guys.
This is a name. That is a pretty good turn of phrase. That sounds like a name recognition one.
Right. So specifically, this iteration of Alonzo Mourning for the 2002 All-Star game. Sorry, Alonzo, that iteration of you is banned. We are more than welcome to hear more about pre-Y2K Alonzo Mourning, but for now, sorry. He did not get recognized by the NBA for this great season that he had, but he did get recognized by his country. Andre Miller is named to the U.S. men's national team for the 2002 FIBA championships, which is unfortunately probably the worst iteration ever of U.S. men's basketball. But they did have Andre Miller on that team, and I bet you they didn't give him enough minutes, and if they would have done better.
So worse than 2004 Olympics?
Well, because at least you got the bronze.
FIBA World Cup, yeah.
Yeah, at least you got the bronze then. But yeah, they finished second in their group to just barely get into the quarterfinals and then immediately lost their quarterfinals match. But again, let it be said, U.S. men's basketball team member, Andre Miller.
Legend, even.
He is a legend. And
you know who led that team in scoring?
2002. Would Iverson have been on the team? Probably not Iverson.
You're close. You're close. Think of the opposite of Iverson. Think of similar nicknames to Iverson.
Paul Pierce.
Yes.
Nice.
Oh my God.
Paul Pierce.
Yeah.
Paul Pierce led that team in scoring with 20 points a game. Andre Miller was third in scoring on that team behind Paul Pierce and Michael Finley.
Now there's a
Michael
guy.
Finley.
And then right behind him was Sean Marion. So the top 4 scorers on that team were Paul Pierce, Michael Finley, Andre Miller, and Sean Marion.
I mean, 3 of the top 4 scorers all played the same position, and the 4th is a point guard who's passed first. That team's destined for failure.
Such a
That's
bad
disgusting.
team.
That's disgusting.
But Diaz, I ask you, what is Andre Miller destined for?
Well, he's destined for a trade because the Cleveland Cavaliers, they're a directionless organization. They don't know what the hell they're doing. So a team that does know what they're doing is going to see this and they're going to capitalize. And so the definitely not a joke LA Clippers make a move to trade for Andre Miller. They send out Darius Miles. Each team also sent out one other guy. But, like, I look at this trade, and this was Andre Miller for Darius Miles. And that's fine. That's a fine trade. Andre Miller's brought in basically to be the stabilizing force for this young, rising Clippers team. Darius Miles was another of a list of incredible athletes on the wing, but ones that didn't necessarily complement each other because the team still had Elton Brand, you had Lamar Odom, you had Corey Maggette, a bunch of guys who know how to put it in the hole, but we just need somebody to get them in their spots and to distribute it and to make sure that the whole team is humming in a happy manner. So they bring in Andre Miller to run the offense and get the Clippers hopefully to the playoffs for the first time. And I don't think it would have been franchise history, but it was certainly for a long time. Andre Miller averages 13.6 points a game, 6.7 assists a game, and the Clippers suck this year. They finished second worst in the league with their record. It's really bad. And look, they sold Andre Miller on this vision, but now, 4 years, he's a free agent. He can go wherever he wants. He wants to go to a team that has a chance to win, so he signs a 6-year, $50 million deal with the Denver Nuggets to run the offense. And in a similar vein, there's a young Carmelo Anthony here. They want a stabilizing force on this team, a respected veteran to help guide the way with the new face of the franchise aboard. First year, averages 14.8, 6.1 assists. Nuggets qualify for the playoffs. They lose in 5 in the first round to the Wolves. Second year, 13.6, 6.7 assists, and they lose in 5 to the Spurs. The third year, 13.7 points, 8.2 assists. Pretty significant hike there. They meet in the first round and lose in 5 to those same LA Clippers that he ran away from because they were such a joke.
That one hurts a little bit. Sorry for the Spurs one, buddy, but oof, that Clippers one hurts.
I mean, it's really tough, and it's the thing that makes the Nuggets kind of look at themselves and say, look, we're putting up these good regular season records. We're not able to get it done in the playoffs. What changes in the playoffs? Well, guys aren't really able to get in their spots, and what it really comes down to is isolation scoring, right? Who can just go get a bucket for himself when he needs to? And it's too much to just ask Melo to do this by himself. So a couple weeks, maybe a month and a half into the next season, Allen Iverson is very discontented in Philadelphia, and Denver decides to make a move. They're going to package Andre Miller with Joe Smith and 2 first-rounders, send him to Philly to get back Allen Iverson. Andre Miller joins the Sixers team that is really struggling at this point, off to a horrible start that year, basically because of the circus that everybody forgets happens at the very end of Iverson's first stint with the Sixers, but it was an absolute fucking circus for like the last year. He didn't show up until the second quarter on fan appreciation night of the previous season. Like, it got really ugly. But now they have Andre Miller in. They happen to be a stabilizing point guard. And they were very exciting. You had Andre Iguodala on this team at this point, and I mean, it was just lob after lob after lob. It was so fucking fun to watch. Even though they weren't very good, Andre Miller still finished 13.6 points, 7.3 assists. They don't make the playoffs. They finished like 5-6 games out of the playoffs. But there is one game I want to mention. In March, Allen Iverson with the Denver Nuggets returned to Philadelphia for the first time. It is an all-time Sixers game to watch and to remember, particularly because Allen Iverson got his in that game. But Andre Miller outplayed him throughout, and it was when, with his classic old man move, he pump faked, got Iverson in the air, drew the foul, finished, made the free throw. That was essentially the ceiling play in a dramatic Sixers win in the Iverson return game. But as I mentioned, missed the playoffs. Year 2, now he's got a full offseason to sit with the Sixers and to learn. He starts all 82 games, averages a career-high 17 points a game to go with an incredibly nice 6.9 assists per game to power the Sixers all the way into the 7th seed, where they get the Detroit Pistons. Game 1, behind 15-7-7 from Andre Miller, they end up winning in Detroit against, I don't think they were defending Eastern Conference champions, but this was the stretch where they made like 7 Eastern Conference finals in a row. So like big dogs in the East at this point. I also just want to mention from that game 1, Reggie Evans, 11 points, 14 rebounds. But if you asked me what his stat line was offhand, I would have told you he had 40 points and 20 rebounds. It was the most incredible game I've ever seen from a very bad basketball player. And it was capped off with, like, the Sixers were up 2 with like 40 seconds left. Pistons are putting on the clamps defensively. All of a sudden, there's 1 second on the shot clock, and it's Reggie Evans like a step in from the 3-point line. Was like a 40% free throw shooter and never shot jump shots. And what does he do? He fucking cashed that jumper off an assist from Andre Miller. Oh, man. I just needed to get that tangent in real quick. It's one of my favorite little fucking things from a Sixers game ever. I love Reggie Evans. Sixers get blown out in game 2. They go back home for game 3. And behind 21 points from Andre Miller, for the first time in Andre Miller's career, he has won 2 playoff games in 1 playoff round. It's an incredible achievement. When we get to game 4, the Sixers lead 46-36 at halftime at home. They're up 10. They are this close to going up 3-1 on the Kings of the East. And the Detroit Pistons are pissed off, and they wake up. And they surge back ahead in the third quarter after winning that quarter 32-12. They would never trail again for a single minute of the rest of the series as they closed out the Sixers in 6 games.
How did young Diaz feel about that?
Well, it was the first in a long line of lessons of like, the second that you actually start to believe is the second that it's about to all come crashing down. Because to that point, I like, even up 2-1, I was like, look, they won 2 games against the Pistons. This is amazing. Just like fight hard, and like, I'm already proud of this team. Going into halftime, you're up 10. I mean, come on. How are you not already thinking ahead like, look, we win this and we have all the momentum. They're dead men walking in Detroit. We get LeBron and the Cavs in the next round. LeBron doesn't have any help. Andre Iguodala is the LeBron stopper. I was going all the way.
You can't believe.
It's the hope that kills you. It really is. And, you know, I was also hoping Andre Miller would be a longtime fixture here with the Sixers. And he does play the entire next season with the Sixers. He starts all 82 games, 16.3 points, 6.5 assists. Sixers again steal a road game 1 against a highly favored team, the Orlando Magic. They lose game 2. They win game 3 behind 24-7-9 from Andre Miller and a game-winning layup from Thad Young. It is a neck-and-neck game with the Magic going down into the final seconds of game 4, but it is Hedo Turkoglu who hits the dagger 3. And what also hurts is this was his steroid season. Like when it came out that, Hedo Turkoglu like tested positive for steroids, it was this season that he did it.
Is there another Turkish basketball player we need to ban from the Hall?
Well, I don't know if I want to say Turkish, and I kind of just want to say like that Magic team, because Rashard Lewis also got popped for PEDs after also having a career year that season. Like JJ Redick was on that team. There's a lot of, I don't know. I'm not going to outright say ban, but the Sixers do lose in 6 games to Orlando Magic. Andre Miller's a free agent after this. He's already played for 4 teams to this point. Becomes a free agent. And lucky number 5 he's open is going to be the Portland Trail Blazers. He signs for 3 years, $21 million. Year 1, 14 points, 5.5 assists. They make the playoffs. He still can't get past that first round, though. They lose in 6 to the Phoenix Suns. His second year, 12.7 points, 7 assists. They again make the playoffs. He again loses in 6 games in the first round. It is to the NBA champion Mavericks, though. So, fine. Understandable. In the offseason, as he enters the final year of his deal, he gets traded back to Denver. Denver remembers how good he was as a stabilizing force. They want to bring him back, so they trade Raymond Felton for him. And his first game back, he gets the kind of personal revenge match against the Dallas Mavericks, who eliminated him the previous year. He goes 18 points, 5 boards, 5 assists, 3 steals, 1 block, and they end up winning that game. But the most notable thing about this season on the whole, for his whole career, Andre Miller's been a starting point guard. But At this point, he's now 35, and Denver says, like, look, we want you to be here to be a role model. Can you do the right thing for the team? Can you come off the bench? Andre Miller, of course, no problem. So he comes off the bench. His averages fall accordingly, obviously. 9.7 points, but still 6.7 assists. And he finished 18th in Sixth Man of the Year voting.
Didn't know it went down that far.
I didn't either.
He probably got one third place vote along with like 17 other people.
So he tied for 18th with two other people, George Hill and J.R. Smith. Tied for 15th just ahead of them. We have another three-way tie between Mike Dunleavy, Tyler Hansbrough, and Gary Neal. Tied for 11th, we had Jamal Crawford, Carl Landry, Zach Randolph, and C.J. Watson. This is just such a great list of guys. I just need to finish it off. Number 10, Kyle Korver. Number 9, Thaddeus Young. Number 8, Mo Williams. Number 7, O.J. Mayo. Tied for 5th, we have Taj Gibson and Spurs legend Manu Ginobili.
Unconscionable that he's this low. Sorry, please continue.
Well, we might need to ban these next 4 people, and especially the last one, because 4th, we're going to have Al Harrington. Number 3, we're going to have his old Arizona nemesis, back when from his collegiate days, Jason Terry. Number 2, Lou Williams. I do love Sweet Lou, but I think we could have discussions on banning the winner of the Sixth Man of the Year award this year, James Harden.
I think we can just let it be known he ain't coming in.
No, that's absolutely not. I mean, we already did the facial hair episode, and we recognized 3 much more fabulous follicles than his. A lot more than 3. 3 groups of follicles. There's probably like, we're not quite 1 million, right? Across those 3 beards. Probably like.
Oh, I have no idea what
high
the,
10,
where
high 10,000s.
Yeah.
High 10,000s probably.
That feels right.
That sounds about right. Behind this sacrifice from Andre Miller, he is able to go to heights never before seen in his playoff career. He gets to Game 7, and they lose to the LA Lakers. Andre Miller, only 3 points, 3 assists in 24 minutes. He's now entering his age 36 season, and at this point, very happy to settle down his roots. He's already played for 5 different franchises. Back home in Denver, let's settle it down. Signs a new 3-year deal to come back. Plays all 82, makes just 11 starts, 9.6 points, 5.7 assists, and about 26 minutes a game. This time, he finishes 6th in Sixth Man of the Year voting, which to me is the true sixth man. It is the 6th man of them all. J.R. Smith, Jared Jack, Kevin Martin, Jamal Crawford, Ryan Anderson finish ahead of him.
Slow-mo. No, that's Kyle, my bad.
Yeah. Ryan Anderson is the white guy that shot all the threes.
You know, the one.
Yeah, the one white guy. The next season, he's about halfway through the year, and his plans to set down roots in Denver are unfortunately foiled when he gets traded to Washington. Plays that year with the Wizards, finishes it out. But it is because of this trade that for the first time, Andre Miller wins a playoff series. They beat the Bulls in 5 in that first round. They get to the conference semifinals, and they lose in 6 to the Pacers. Starts the next season in Washington. Gets traded midseason again. There is no respect for the veteran. It is appalling. And worst of all, they send him to the perhaps only more hapless team than any of the ones that we've mentioned so far, the Sacramento Kings.
Ooh.
Goes to Sacramento. It's real tough. He plays 81 games, averages 4 points, 3 assists, and naturally misses the playoffs. At this point, he's ran out that contract that he signed with Denver. He could just choose to retire, but he thinks he still has a little bit left in the tank. So for his age 39 season, for his 8th team, he signs with the Minnesota Timberwolves. They released him halfway through the season, and this could have been it. But I did say at the very start that we are talking about San Antonio Spurs legend, Andre Miller. The Spurs sign Andre Miller just in time to be playoff eligible. Plays 13 games for in the regular season. He makes 4 starts, which are his first 4 in nearly 3 years at this point. His first one back was a revenge game against the Wolves. He drops 15 points and 5 assists en route to the win. And also worth mentioning, these were the 2016 Spurs. They of the 67 wins. This year was the passing of the guard series with the Thunder. This is when we thought, wow, KD and Russ, are finally over the hump. They might not win it all this year, but they've proven that they're going to have this long sustained partnership that definitely didn't get broken up that offseason. They lose. Andre Miller, not really a contributor in the playoffs. He got into 5 different games, but they're all in kind of garbage time. And at this point, he decides to call it a career. And what a career it was. He is the only player in the history of the NBA to not make an All-Star game while having at least 15,000 points, 8,000 assists, and 1,500 steals. A tremendous injustice, but as we said, the floor general is a dying breed. And when a general can no longer take the floor, he takes to the sideline. We are, again, talking about the head coach of the Grand Rapids Gold, the G League affiliate of those Denver Nuggets. So still trying to stay loyal to that organization. I do have to tell you, in his first year as head coach, they went 9-23. And as we record right now, they're 11-20. It's not great.
That's 2 more wins. That's 2 more wins this year, baby. You do that every year, and that adds up.
It is 2 more wins. Incremental improvements. And I mean, that's really, I think, kind of what Andre Miller is all about. When he first got to high school, showing up with grass stains on his shorts, works his way all the way up to being the best player in all of Southern California. And just that stick-to-itiveness, that work effort, I think is kind of central to what we look for in guys. And I think even though you could say he's struggling right now with his ability to teach the guys of tomorrow, I don't think that takes away from him being a guy of today. So Andre Miller, my nomination for the Hall this week.
I was getting a little worried there because halfway through Denver, I was like, once again, much like Earl Morrall, oh no, don't get too comfortable here. We need to hear the journey. But I was those last couple of years of a flurry of trades, excellent kind of cap to a true journeyman.
It's the dramatic irony of it. You think he's finally has come home, and ultimately he does eventually land back with the organization. But yes, he had to make pit stops at 4 other different teams first.
I really liked the presentations for the 2 of you, but I think I have a guy that you're really going to enjoy. What do you remember about the Uruguay versus Ghana quarterfinal of the 2010 World Cup?
I remember Luis Suarez making the most intelligent play in the history of professional sports and sacrificing himself and falling on the sword to handball it off of the line. And I remember some guy for Ghana choking like a dog and shooting it off the bar. And
Asamoah Gyan.
Yes, that's the name.
But do you remember who actually sent Uruguay to the semifinals?
I remember how it was done. I remember it was a very cheeky chip right down the middle, but I don't remember who it was.
Well, you were right about the chip. It was El Loco, Sebastián Abreu, and that's what I want to talk about today. Sebastián Abreu, born October 17, 1976 in Minas, Uruguay. For anyone who doesn't know, more than half of Uruguay's population lives in Montevideo, and if you live anywhere else in Uruguay, you're not really that important. Minas is not in the Montevideo metropolitan area. It is a very small town, 4 or 5 hours further to the northeast. Of the 16 teams in the Uruguayan Primera Division, 13 are from Montevideo. So if you want to play sports, you kind of have to go there.
And you thought England was bad with all the teams in London. Yeah,
imagine a world where 25 of 30 baseball teams were New York or New York metropolitan area, and then there were 4 spread out in the rest of the country. So that's what Uruguay is like. A young Sebastian, like many in Uruguay, was a big soccer player. But that wasn't the only thing he played, because he was also a big basketball player and was called up to the under-17 national team for basketball for the South American Championships. His family, living far away, got stuck in traffic, and the coach cut him because he showed up late to the call-up. This was very disappointing for Sebastian because he did like basketball more, but this was also an opportunity because the coach of the under-17 soccer team said, all right, he's free now. I want that guy. Let's call this guy up. And so he gets called up to the South American Championships for soccer instead, where he plays extremely well. He is very tall. Even at this point, he's a striker, so he's scoring a lot of headed goals. The sporting directors and establishment at Defensor saw him play at this under-17 and were like, all right, we need to get this guy into our academy. So they go to Minas and they purchase him. For those who don't know, Defensor is traditionally the third best team in a league that is dominated by a big two. So, the worst place to be, really. For context, Penarol and Nacional have won a combined 100 Uruguayan titles, 51 for Penarol and 49 for Nacional. Defensor has 4. So that's where he's at. It's like, if you can't be good enough to go to Penarol or Nacional, you're probably going to go to Defensor. So he spends 2 years in the Defensor Academy for making his debut in the 95 Primera season. Starting as a striker, he scores 13 goals in 24 games. At the age of 19, he gets called up to the Uruguayan national team for a World Cup qualifier against Venezuela. He doesn't get off the bench, but he does make his debut later that same year, plays 45 minutes in a 1-1 draw against China, and then he scores his first international goal in a 5-3 loss against Japan. Now considered one of the brightest talents in Uruguay, teams from other leagues are lining up to try to get him, and so he moves to San Lorenzo in the Argentinian league, which is a stronger league than the Uruguayan league, and with San Lorenzo, who is considered one of the big 5 in Argentina, he has 26 goals in 2 years. He's looking really good. Nothing has changed to, go off that trajectory of really top prospect. And because of that, he makes the jump to Europe. Gets signed by Deportivo La Coruña, Super Depor, January of 1998. For those who don't know, some of our listeners might not be familiar with Depor because currently they play in the 3rd division in Spain. But at this point, they were a really top side. They won La Liga in the 1999-2000 season. They played in the Champions League for 5 years in a row, including making the semifinals in 2003-2004, only losing 1-0 on aggregate to Jose Mourinho's Porto team that, won it all, giving up 0 goals in the process. So this is a hard team to break into, especially for a 20-year-old who's new to Europe. So after 15 games and only 3 goals, although one was in a rather famous 3-1 win against Barcelona, Depor loans him back to South America, this time to Grêmio in Brazil, where he plays 7 games from July through October. After the Brazilian season is over, he goes back to Depor, but he still can't break into the team. So they loan him again, this time to Tecos in Guadalajara. He excels in Liga MX. He scores 27 goals in 33 games. He wins the Golden Boot for the 2000 spring season, but he still can't break into the Depor first team. So they loan him again, this time back to where they bought him from, with San Lorenzo in Argentina. He scores double digits there in half a season. Then gets loaned again for the fall season to Nacional in Uruguay, where he scores 16 goals in 18 games. He technically wins 2 titles in the same calendar year because he won the 2001 Clausura with San Lorenzo and the 2001 Uruguayan Primera with Nacional, thanks to the fact that Uruguay and Argentina run their seasons at different times. Because in Latin America, there are a lot of split seasons where they do a spring season and a fall season, the Apertura and the Clausura. They're separate. Some countries have a championship between the winners of both, but others just say, no, you're just the champion of this one, champion of this one. And others do a full season. But because of the weather in South America, it's also different than the calendar season in Europe. So this is why, when he's done with the loan, it's usually mid-season for Depor, and they don't feel like trying to integrate him into the squad, despite the fact he's scoring bucket loads of goals in Latin America. So at this point, the now 25-year-old Abreu has played for 6 different teams, but that is just a drop in the bucket. After his half season with Nacional, he gets loaned back to Liga MX, this time with Cruz Azul. He dominates the spring season. He scores 19 goals in 18 games, finishing with 5 more than anyone else. This also gets him back into the Uruguayan national team picture because his international career kind of stagnated. He'd only had 2 brief substitute appearances over the past 4 years, but this goal scoring in Mexico gets him another call-up. And in the lead-up to the World Cup, he scores 6 goals in 4 games, including braces against host nation South Korea, brace against China, a goal against Italy, and a goal against the USA, and that gets him a late spot in that World Cup squad. Unfortunately, Uruguay does struggle in that World Cup. He does not do very well, and once again, he ends up out of the Uruguay national team picture for another 4 years. After the World Cup, he goes back to Cruz Azul, and then he gets loaned to another Liga MX team, Club America. And then again, back to Tecos. So 3 different Liga MX teams in a row. Finally, in the summer of 2004, Abreu's Deport contract expires. And he's free to sign with whoever he wants. He's just had 8 different loans under the same contract, trying to get some stability. So what does he do? He goes back home to Uruguay and signs with Nacional. Does really well. He scores 16 goals in 31 games. But Abreu can't stay settled for too long. So in the summer of 2005, he moves back to Mexico. This time with Dorados de Sinaloa. And he is phenomenal for them. He wins another Golden Boot with 11 goals in the fall season. And then replicates that with 11 goals in the spring season, winning the Golden Boot again.
That was my next question. So you have multiple boots. And that's appropriate. Every year you have a pair of boots. That's how it should work.
Yeah, so he wins the Golden Boot back-to-back with Sinaloa, which is a very bad team. To this day, he is the top scorer in Sinaloa Liga MX history because they only played 1 season in Liga MX because they finished 8th out of 18 teams in the spring season. They finished 13th in the fall, but there's a weird relegation rule in Liga MX that gives extra points to teams that have been in the league longer, and they waited. So the fact that Sinaloa had just come up from the second division, they didn't have a higher weighting, so they end up getting relegated on a tiebreaker, despite having been much, much better than the team that stayed up over them. It's very strange. Liga MX relegation rules are really weird.
That's dumb as hell.
Yeah, I mean, they eventually just stopped relegation in Liga MX for 4 years in a row. No one got relegated because they didn't think anyone in the second division had enough money to be worth it in Liga MX.
Yeah, I mean, it's like reverse Mario Kart rules is what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I get the blue shells now, bitches.
So, he's not going to, play in the second division of Mexico. He's too good. He stays in country, but moves to Rayados in Monterrey, one of the biggest clubs in all of Mexico, for the 2006 fall season. He scores 7 goals in 16 games. Not as good a return as he had with Sinaloa, but still pretty good. But Mexico's pretty cutthroat. Monterrey doesn't want to keep him after the fall season. So then he goes to San Luis in the spring season. So now we are at 7th different Mexican team in 5 years or something like that. Scores 6 goals with San Luis, and he moves again. This time to Rayados' big rival, Tigres, another Liga MX team, and actually becomes the first foreigner to score for both teams in the Clásico Regio Montano, which is the big derby between Tigres and Monterrey. If you don't know, they kill people over this game. People will camp outside for weeks to get tickets. It's absolutely massive. And he's one of the few people to play for both and the first foreigner to score for both. This goal scoring with Tigres brings him back to the national team again, and he makes the 2007 Copa America squad. He's actually kind of in a good spot here where he doesn't play any of the shitty friendlies over 3 or 4 years multiple times. And then Uruguay missed the 2006 World Cup, so he didn't miss anything there. but he just gets hot enough just to get back in the national team picture right before the big tournaments. In the semifinals against Brazil, he scores his first competitive goal for Uruguay in 10 years, since a 1997 goal against Ecuador as a 21-year-old, with a goal in the 69th minute.
Nice.
Thank you. Uruguay does end up losing on penalties, although he did score his, and they go to a third-place game against the country that he has spent most of the past 10 years in, Mexico, because Mexico was a guest team to the Copa America this year. Abreu scores again. He gets the opener in the 22nd minute. Unfortunately, Mexico does then score 3 unanswered to win 3-1. After the Copa America, Abreu gets loaned by Tigres to River Plate in Argentina because he gets a call from a younger Diego Simeone, El Cholo, for any of our fans who know Atletico Madrid, one of the best coaches in the world. At this point, he had just started coaching. He was coaching River Plate. He says, Sebastian, I want you to come over here. Is there any way you can come from Mexico and play for me? So he goes to Argentina, and they win the 2008 Clausura. It's like, my job is done. I have no contract again after the season. What am I going to do? He gets signed by Beitar Jerusalem of the Israeli Premier League because they were in the Champions League qualifying rounds, and they needed some extra help to get them through these qualifying rounds. For those who don't know, there are a lot of qualifying rounds for the Champions League that start in like while everyone else is in preseason or off season and before any regular seasons start. And so they signed a bunch of out of contract people, including Sebastián Abreu. They lose to a Polish team in the qualifying rounds. And then they're like, okay, well, we can't actually afford to keep you if we're not going to be in the Champions League. So they terminate his contract after these 2 games. So he goes back to River Plate, but at this point, the window for signing people for the Argentinian league has closed, so he can't play in the league. Instead, he can only play in the Copa Sudamerica, which is their equivalent. It's actually technically the second tier of their Champions Leagues. They're essentially their Europa League. And so he only plays in the Copa Sudamerica for that entire season. Because he can't play in the actual league, once they're done with the Sudamerica stuff, they loan him back to Spain. And this time, he goes to the second division with Real Sociedad, La Real. Very good team. At this point, though, they were second division. And he plays really well. He has 11 goals in 18 games in the Spanish second division. He gets a hat trick against Jerez. But Sociedad don't get promoted. And they're like, all right, well, we can't afford to keep you as much as we would want to. So, again, he's out of contract, looking for a place to go. This time, he signs with Aris in the Greek Super League. This is very different than anywhere else that he's played at this point, and he struggles to adapt. He plays 8 games, he only scores 3 goals. It's not really working out. But at the same time, he is making a massive contribution to Uruguay. Uruguay is in the intercontinental playoff for one of the last spots in the World Cup, and they are playing Costa Rica. After a 1-0 game in the first leg that he isn't playing, he scores the deciding goal in the second leg to send Uruguay to the 2010 World Cup. There is no World Cup run without Abreu scoring that goal against Costa Rica. He's essentially like a national hero, despite being this guy who shows up once every 4 years to play well for the national team, because he's getting them there. But he's not the star of that team. The stars of those teams are Diego Forlán and Luis Suarez. A young Luis Suarez at that point. Diego Forlán, for people who know, absolutely phenomenal at this point. One of the best players in the world. After this World Cup qualifying, and with things going poorly in Greece, he gets his contract canceled. And in January of 2010, the now 33-year-old Abreu goes back to South America, this time signing with Botafogo in Brazil. I talked about weird split seasons in South American leagues earlier. Brazil is probably the worst offender in this. The way Brazil works is that in the spring, there are state championships. So every single state has a 17 or 18 game season. It's like if New York, all the New York teams, no matter how good or bad, all played each other. You can win a title there, but your standings in those leagues will dictate if you make it to the full Brazilian league, the Serie A, Serie B, Serie C, Serie D. That happens in the summer and fall. With Botafogo, he first competes in the Campeonato Carioca, which is the league for Rio de Janeiro. He scores 11 goals and leads Botafogo to the state title over their rival Flamengo. In the last game of the season, it was tied late when Botafogo were awarded a penalty. Abreu steps up, and he panenkas it so hard, it clips the bar and goes bar down and in behind the goalie. That's not how you want to do a panenka, but it looked really badass, and it did work because that won them the title. Allegedly, Botafogo fans for years would chant, "Remember and live, Loco Abreu destroyed you," which I think is a phenomenal chant, and I want to know how to say that in Portuguese, but I couldn't 100% figure it out.
My very ignorant take as a person, I would say I do consider myself fluent in Spanish. Sometimes not quite as fluent, but I consider myself fluent. And I can understand Portuguese pretty well. And I would say you just change your O's and your U's is what a lot of it is.
Throw a few more S's that should be Z's in there.
Muito alegria. I'm pretty sure I just said very happy, very grateful, but if I said something else, I'm sorry.
So after this state championship, Abreu gets named to the 2010 World Cup squad. After coming off the bench in the opener against France, he doesn't see any game time at all in the next 3 games, the group stage games against South Africa and Mexico, and the round of 16 game against South Korea. Because again, at this point, Uruguay is led by going to be Golden Ball winner Diego Forlan, a very young Luis Suarez, and a younger version of Sebastián Abreu in Edinson Cavani. That's a ridiculous set of attacking players. Absolutely insane. After beating South Korea, they're in the quarterfinals against Ghana. For those who don't remember, this is essentially a home game for Ghana because this is the first African World Cup. Ghana is the only African team left in it, and they're seeking to be the first African team to ever make the World Cup semis. In the 76th minute of a 1-1 game, Abreu gets subbed in for Edinson Cavani, his first game time since that opener against France. As Diaz put it earlier, this game goes deep into stoppage time. In the last minute of the game, Luis Suarez deliberately handles on the line to stop a winner from going in. He gets red carded. He gets punished. It's a red card and a penalty, which, people get upset about the fact that they think a goal should have just been given for it. But it's a red card. It's a penalty. Asamoah Gyan had his chance, and he blazed it over the bar. And that takes this game to a shootout. In the shootout, John Mensah, Dominic Adia have their penalty saved. And up steps Sebastián Abreu with the game in the line. And like Diaz said, calmly steps up, chips it right down the middle. This one was not a hard chip like the one against Flamengo. This was as delicate as you like. He waits for the goalie to commit, diving to his right. He's already running off celebrating while the ball's in the air because it's going so slowly. He knows the goalkeeper can't get up and get to it anyway and can just see it go in. So he's already running off and celebrating. And Uruguay make it to the semis.
I am delighted to learn that this is kind of his thing because if you were to tell me that it's just El Loco, right? El Loco is
El Loco. El Loco.
If you were to ask me to guess the way that a player named El Loco takes his penalties, my first guess would probably have been ripping it as hard as possible directly at the goalie's face and daring him to stay there. But the second would be chipping it because it takes unos huevotes to chip it with your World Cup life on the line.
There was another game. This was a league game in Brazil the next year. Against Fluminense, Botafogo's losing 2-1. They get awarded a penalty. He goes up and panenkas it, and the goalie doesn't move. He just stands right there and catches it calmly. But they get another penalty 5 minutes later, and he does the exact same thing, and this time the goalie dives and they tie it up.
Solamente El Loco.
You have to be crazy to panenka it right down the middle after having just done that and having the goalie catch it 3 minutes beforehand. But back to this World Cup. He does go back to the bench for the semis. He only plays like 12 minutes against the Netherlands. Fortunately, they do lose, and he gets off the bench for about a minute in the third place game against Germany. But hey, he did his job. He got Uruguay to the semifinals. Not his fault that they couldn't beat the Netherlands or Germany. Shockingly, after this season, he does stay in Brazil, as I just mentioned. He does stay in Botafogo for his second year. He scores 9 goals in the Carioca, 13 goals in Serie A, and makes the squad for the 2011 Copa America in Argentina. He plays a single minute in the third group stage match against Mexico. But that was enough for him to get a winner's medal, as Uruguay beat Paraguay 3-0 in the final, earning their first trophy in about 20 years.
He wins the competition of the Guys, which I think for this show is probably a very high mark for him.
I would have to agree on that. After this season, he stays in Brazil for a third year. He scores another 11 goals in the Carioca, but after 93 games and 55 goals with Botafogo, both career highs for him with a single team, the now 36-year-old gets loaned to Figueirense in the Serie C of Brazil. Only stays there a couple games. After this, he goes back to Uruguay and Nacional for a third time, and while there, he gets loaned out twice. First to Rosario Central in Argentina, and then to Aucas in Ecuador. After half a season with Aucas, he signs with Sol de America in Paraguay. Plays a couple games there. Then he goes to Santa Tecla in El Salvador, where he scores 13 goals in 21 games. He's still putting them in. He's 40 years old at this point, but he's still putting goals in for whoever will have him. After the El Salvador season, he signs with Bangu back in Rio, where he plays 10 games in the Carioca before having his contract terminated. So he goes back to Uruguay. He plays with Central Español in the Segunda Division, scores 6 goals in 8 games, then gets signed by Puerto Montt in the Chilean Second Division, where he scores 11 goals in 13 games. This 40-year-old man scored 20 goals across 3 teams in 3 different countries in the same calendar year. At this point, he's played in 6 different South American countries: Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Ecuador, Chile, 7 different Mexican clubs: Tecos, Cruz Azul, América, Sinaloa, Rayados, San Luis, Tigres. But he's not done yet. Thanks to his goal-scoring prowess in the Chilean Second Division, he gets signed by Audax Italiano of the Chilean Primera Division.
Naturally, Italiano is a Chilean team.
Yes. And this sets a world record as he becomes the first player to play for 26 different professional clubs. He was a player for 4 more years for 6 more different clubs, including a couple of player-manager spells before ending his career with his original boyhood club of Olimpia de Minas at the age of 44. Overall, Sebastián Abreu played for a record 32 professional clubs, playing 690 league games and scoring 336 league goals, including cup including cup competitions. It's estimated that he played 850 games or more with approximately 430 goals. If we had better records, he might be like one of the 100 top goal scorers in the history of soccer. He won 8 league titles in 4 different countries. He won the 2019 Copa El Salvador as a caretaker manager after the original manager was fired in season, and Tecla just said, "Hey, can you do this?" while he was still playing full-time for Rio Branco in Brazil. And so after he wins this cup competition, Boston River in Uruguay asked him, "Hey, do you want to just be our player manager?" And so he then spends a year there as a player manager because he is now not only a great goal scorer, he is a silverware-winning soccer coach.
Boston River, also somewhere in a very logical location, Montevideo, Uruguay.
I've noticed there's so many of those South American teams that just have like there's like Palestino is like one of the teams. Like, I honestly, when I saw that he played for Beitar Jerusalem, I clicked it on Wikipedia. I expected it to be in like Bolivia.
Like not Israel, yeah.
I mean, he plays against Liverpool a lot, but it's the Liverpool in Montevideo. So you can just kind of just assume that they're all South American teams, and you'll almost certainly be right. Just as if you assume any Uruguayan team is in Montevideo, you'll probably be right. No one in the modern era of Liga MX has topped his 4 golden boots. So that goes back since the fall of 1996. That's when they first started doing the split season. He played 70 games for Uruguay over 16 years, scoring 26 goals, which puts him 7th on the country's scoring chart. He is officially recognized by the Guinness World Records and FIFA as football's ultimate journeyman, thanks to his 32 clubs. It's going to be pretty hard for anyone to top that. One random little factoid that I just want to end on. He was the last active player to have played against Maradona because he played against him in 1997 and was still active in 2021, a year after Maradona had died.
It's like that one Civil War widow.
Pretty much like that. Exactly like that. He's South America, so let's just say it's exactly like that.
Exactly the same thing.
Yes, Sebastián Abreu, El Loco, the man crazy enough to take a Panenka to send his country to the World Cup semifinals despite being a, role-playing bench guy who just liked scoring goals so much, was willing to move to 32 different clubs in pretty much every country in South America and Latin America you could think of, just to put the ball in the back of the net. And I would love it if we were able to recognize El Loco by inducting him into the Hall of Guy.
I mean, it's a great case, but not a walk in the park for him. We look at both of these other journeymen. We've got one journeyman that is... I mean, look, we've got golden boots out there. That's great. I don't know that a golden boot impresses me quite as much as stepping in for Johnny Unitas and an MVP award. And then Andre Miller, a guy who tried to avoid that journeyman role that he had. He tried to set down roots, become a fan favorite in a city. It was foisted upon him.
I am very, very happy to relive that World Cup game, though, I will say, because for me personally, like, my journey as a soccer fan starts with that World Cup. I watched soccer before then. I vaguely remember watching the 2006 U.S. Men's World Cup run. I knew that the Philadelphia Union either were a thing by that point or were about to be a thing, but I never really got into it. But it was that Uruguay team that I fell in love with. And to get more backstory on, obviously I knew all about Forlan. I knew all about Suarez. But to learn about the third striker on those teams and the guy who had the
4th striker after Edinson Cavani.
Right, yeah, 4th even, which is crazy. Yeah, I love learning about him. I love learning that it was not a spur-of-the-moment decision to do that Panenka. It was like, I am Panenka, man. I will Panenka.
It's a shtick, yeah. He's the Panenka guy.
This is your thing. And to simply be nicknamed El Loco as well. It is a very strong case. I do love Andre Miller, but it is
good pull on the Union, by the way. Their first season was 2010. That is a great pull.
That's probably why I watched that World Cup, honestly, because I was like, fuck, I'm about to have a team. I might as well.
Get into it. Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of people, like, at least that we know, like, got into soccer because of that 2010 World Cup, because it started off with USA England and ended with Landon Donovan in stoppage time against Algeria to send them to the knockout stages. I mean, I remember being in high school, that being the first real time I got, like, emotionally invested in soccer.
Those fucking Algerians, man. Dude, they were flopping all over the place and trying to waste time in that game. And we had at least one, I think maybe 2 goals called back for offside, and at least one of them was total bullshit. Ugh. But then we got the Landon Donovan goal.
Which is still one of the best moments in, like, U.S. sporting history.
I think I was watching that in, like, a Hopkins lab with some of the guys from the lab next door, just like, hey, we got the stream on the TV, and pulled me in. We're like, yeah, we'll worry about these auger gels and stuff later. What a fucking game. And, I mean, he does have the 690 games, which is very nice. If he had played one fewer international game,
I know.
A competition.
I'm so mad that he played that 1 minute off the bench against Germany in the third place game.
Yeah.
It was so irrelevant. I know they probably just wanted to let him get on at that point, be like, hey, you got to do it. So close.
I think, unless either of you want to correct me, though, like, while I'm joking around a little bit about the number of teams aside, we're talking multiple continents. Like, in Mexico, he's got enough of a journeyman career to rival these other two alone. And he's got Asia, if you go to Israel. He's got Europe. He's got all of South America. and North America there with Mexico. It's wild. And while we can pitter-patter around here, that's a pretty tough list of passport stamps to really try and talk about if we're talking about journeyman here.
Oh God, I didn't even think what his passport must look like.
Dog-eared as hell.
Probably destroyed.
Yeah, if we got a year of Vancouver Grizzlies or Toronto Raptors for Andre Miller, I would probably I would hedge my argument on that. Like, hey, look, he's also an international journeyman. But when we're talking about this volume of countries and this volume of clubs, and like 32 is a particularly like crazy number to think to me, because it's like, if he played like American football, that would mean that he played for every single team in the NFL, basically.
I do like Sebastián Abreu, but I do want to just say I like Andre Miller a whole lot because I love old man basketball. So even if, just personally I love Abreu and I like Abreu more, I do love Andre Miller. So I don't want to let it go unsaid that bring me all the old man basketball players. Everyone who just wants to be slow and deliberate. I mean, Luca, when he first came into the league, I feel like he's kind of
right back to Kyle Anderson. Now. Right back to Kyle Anderson, baby.
Love the deliberate, like it looks like they're moving in slow motion, but everything they're doing is deliberate, and it's so pleasing on the eye to me personally. So I do want to give that shout out to Andre Miller, even if I personally just love the story of Sebastián Abreu.
Well, and back to what James said at the top, like the fact that he does it so slow does allow you to delude yourself into thinking like, I could like very slowly dribble to a certain spot on the court and then make a pass. Like, I could do that.
It lulls you into that sense of believing you do that. And you know what? A lot of us probably think that we could chip in those goals with the Panenka style. We probably think that we could do that. We are wrong, but we probably think that. But it sounds like we are at least not wrong in our agreement here. So speaking of slow motion, let's let that slow motion confetti fall, Diaz, as you take care of some honors here.
Well, really, the choice is made for us, because if we're talking about a journeyman and we're talking about 32 different clubs in anywhere from 4 to 9 different countries, I know that range at least covers what Xavier said. I don't remember the exact number. You don't need to correct me. It's close enough. But Sebastián Abreu, a man of many convictions, a man who firmly believes, why would I rocket this shot? I'm just going to nicely tuck this little chipper in. I'm going to play in 690 games. I'm going to win a few Copas. I'm going to show up for a couple of World Cups. I'm going to do a whole bunch of things. I'm going to score a whole bunch of goals. And he is a loco, but we would be los locos if we did not want to recognize and induct Sebastián Abreu into the Hall of Guy. Bienvenidos, Washington, Sebastián Abreu Gallo.
Washington, Sebastian?
Yeah, his first name is Washington, but it just goes by Sebastian. So
his full name is Washington Sebastián Abreu Gallo.
Gallo. Get the first name? That's also very good.
Gallo.
That is very good.
I'm just saying. And let's just to be clear, that is rooster in English. But to the English ear, Gallo.
Washington is a wild first name for anyone not from North America.
Washington took the Boston River all the way to the top.
God, he did. Wild. Well, it's been a wild one, folks. We thank you for joining us for it. We thank producer Craig for being here as well, and the coders behind him for making it possible for producer Craig to record this episode, which then, of course, we thank Don Ham for adding the lovely theme music to the beginning of. But it is you, most of all, that we are appreciative for joining us here. If you want to join us elsewhere and correct Diaz on how many countries there were, because I know I also wasn't counting, but you might have been, and we're counting on you to let us know. You can find all the information to correct us at bit.ly/rememberthatguy, all one word, all lowercase. Feel free to share the show, do anything on social media or on podcast platforms to promote it. We would sure appreciate that more so. But thank you for being here. Anything else from you guys?
Do we dare use our powers for bad and start making predictions on the March Madness games that are to come this weekend?
Purdue's going to lose.
Purdue's going to lose. Yeah, that Zach Edey guy, fuck him. He doesn't deserve any luck or breaks or joy.
I like the NFL's new kickoff rule. It should be fun. I don't think that'll jinx anything, I hope.
I have one final thing to say, which is I realize how I should have phrased this earlier. If I had a nickel for every pillar of the Baltimore community that has collapsed in the last week, I would have 2 nickels, and I have been one of your hosts, James.
I've been the very special guest Xavier.
I'm Diaz, and as Donovan McNabb said in his retirement speech, number guy will always love you.
He will, and we will.
We'll build a bigger
Yeah,
bridge.
A bigger bridge. Our own bridge with blackjack and hookers.
Especially the hookers.